Hi everyone, I'm Giovanni Laquidara from the Developer Relations team, and I'm excited to share how you can quickly support user authentication flows across Android and Fire OS devices with the A3L Authentication SDK. Before I continue, if you are new to building with Fire OS and our A3L libraries, here's a quick refresher. Fire OS is our operating system based on the Android open source project that powers multiple Amazon devices, including Fire TV, Fire Tablet, in-car entertainment system, and more. The App Store abstraction library, which we refer to as A3L, are intended for Android developers to quickly support the same functionality across multiple App Store and services through a unified code base. Let's walk through the A3L Authentication SDK to show how it works. We know that managing multiple authentication libraries across app stores can be a complex and time-consuming effort. The A3L Authentication SDK makes this process simpler and more efficient by integrating with Google Sign-In on Android and Fire OS devices. The SDK enables users to log in using their existing Google Sign-In credential and eliminates the need for users to create new accounts or remember multiple login details for their Amazon devices. AppAuth is a client-side SDK that uses Auth 2.0 and OpenID Connect to authenticate and authorize users on native apps. The A3L Authentication API structure is similar to that of Google Sign-In, so the amount of effort you need to learn and implement the SDK is minimal. This comparison table from our developer docs describes the features offered in A3L Authentication SDK compared to AppAuth and Google Sign-In. Features such as sign-in, sign-out, fetching profile information and authenticating with a backend server are all made possible by the Authentication SDK choosing the right libraries to invoke based on whether the device the app is used on supports Google Play services or not. To get started with the Authentication SDK, you will want to have Android Studio installed and an Android-compatible device with Android API 11.19 or greater. When you download the SDK, you will find a sample app and API references in order to follow along in the developer's doc. Now I'm going to show what it's like to integrate the SDK in Android Studio. Add the SDK AR file to your project list folder and add the dependency line in your build Gradle file pointing to that AR. Don't forget to add also the following 4 dependencies for Google Sign-In and AppAuth. Before integrating A3L authentication into your app, you need to set up and configure a project in the Google API console. You will need to create an Auth 2.0 client ID of the type Android and copy its value. You have to use the client ID in your app to set up the A3L Authentication SDK. This sample, we pass the client ID in a string resource and only take the prefix part. You also have to use the same prefix part of the client ID in the app build.gradle file, adding its value in the AppAuth redirect scheme manifest placeholder. Now let's see how to use the A3L Auth SDK. Declare the main object A3L Sign-In client that you will use for all the A3L Auth actions. In the onCreate of the activity, initialize the A3L Auth SDK calling its init method. This will use the prefix part of the client ID we added before. Then we need to create the desired sign-in options to define the properties we want to get from the user. We will use these options when we instantiate the A3L sign-in client with the getClient method. After this, your A3L sign-in client is ready to be used. You can call the getLastSignedIn account to retrieve the signed-in user info in the onStart. To sign in a user, you can use the intent sign-in intent of the A3L sign-in client and use it in a start activity for result. To sign out a user, you can use the sign-out method of the A3L sign-in client. And to revoke a user, you can call the revoke access of the A3L sign-in client. And when your activity result will be called back, you can extract the profile data with the getSignedIn account from intent. If you want to review the options further, we developed a guided workflow to improve the timing and the Amazon App Store. The workflow for authentication offers guidance on integration options so you can choose the best approach by comparing the technical and feature trade-off. Thank you for watching this developer walkthrough for the A3L Authentication SDK. We hope this SDK will help improve your developer experience when porting Android apps to Fire OS. See you next time!